The colonial era may have been a very important period in American history, but it likely didn't smell very pleasant. Hygiene practices in colonial America were a blend of practicality, religious beliefs, and social status. Poor hygiene was often seen as a sign of bad manners, and religious individuals associated it with the sin of sloth. Today, we're diving into what hygiene was like in colonial America. Now, hold your breath, because we're about to delve into some colonial stench. Captain John Smith, a key figure in the history of the Jamestown colony, meticulously recorded his experiences in America. His experiences apparently involved a lot of bugs. His writings mention troublesome ants and noisy insects like mosquitoes and flies, as well as an India bug called by the Spaniards a cuckaroo. In 1748, George Washington stayed in a bug-infested cabin in the Shenandoah Valley and complained that his blanket was full of vermin like lice and fleas. This experience taught him to prefer sleeping outdoors near lit campfires. A Christian missionary named George Henry Loskiel documented a troublesome plague affecting both humans and animals, which he called living ashes. According to Loskiel, the Native Americans named them this because their bites were as painful as being burned by red-hot ash. In colonial times, full-body baths were rare and typically reserved for infants. These baths were more about hardening the infants against disease rather than cleaning them. Adults and children usually didn't bathe. They just washed occasionally and not very thoroughly. Each morning, a typical person would likely rinse their face and hands with a cloth using a basin and sponge, but that was about it. Those who could afford a bathtub usually had one just large enough for a sponge bath, and even those were taken without soap. For those who couldn't afford a tub, a dip in a local lake or stream on a hot day was probably the closest they'd get to a bath. With indoor plumbing still a long way off, colonial houses had outhouses or just a covered hole in the ground near the building. If you couldn't make it to the outhouse, you could use a chamber pot inside. These chamber pots had to be emptied regularly, which usually involved dumping them out of a window. While this procedure wasn't terribly difficult, it had significant downsides. People in rural areas often lived close to their water sources, and the haphazard sewage control meant that waste frequently contaminated the drinking water, spreading disease. Interestingly, it wasn't just waste that ended up in these holes. In 2014, archaeologists excavated a dozen brick-lined privy shafts from a site that had been an illegal tavern in colonial times. The dig uncovered far more than just sewage. Archaeologists found bottles, bowls, glasses, drinking tankards, tanning supplies, wig curlers, and pottery made by local artisans. Colonial America was not big on sanitation. Outhouses were typically close to water sources, and it wasn't unusual for streets to be clogged with garbage and animal feces. This lack of sanitation meant disease could spread quickly and easily. Dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera were all common, especially during summer. Even the American Revolution was affected by these conditions. It's believed that 2/3 of George Washington's troops at Valley Forge in December 1777 died of dysentery, influenza, or typhoid fever. Conversely, the Continental Army may have benefited from the poor conditions, as large numbers of British troops in the South were killed by various fevers. Among scientists of the era, hygiene was not well understood. Some doctors believed that cleanliness helped to prevent illness and disease, but others favored theories that revolved around bodily oils. In the absence of a compelling scientific explanation, people turned to religion for guidance, and religion was happy to oblige. For the Puritans, cleanliness was more of a moral issue. They saw a direct connection between spiritual health and the cleanliness of people's bodies, clothes, homes, and towns. Moreover, they believed water was purifying and could cleanse the filthiness of the mind as well as the body. Consequently, those who bathed were seen as less likely to engage in other sins and less likely to be poor. However, this only applied to private bathing. The Puritans felt that public bathing had a negative impact on morality and was likely to lead to sexual impropriety and disease. They were strict about cleanliness, as they were Puritans after all. Keeping teeth clean wasn't a big priority for people in the 17th century, and toothaches were common. The first line of defense against them was natural remedies like chamomile or figs. If the pain was more serious, alcohol or even opium might have been used as a painkiller. Dental professionals were rare, and a person who needed a tooth pulled would usually have to get help from a tradesman like a blacksmith, a barber, or an apothecary. Replacing the pulled tooth was common. Sometimes the extracted tooth itself would simply be reinserted into its socket. More frequently, however, dentures and implants were used. These were typically made from wood, ivory, and metal. Sometimes healthy teeth could even be purchased from poor people who were, sadly, often eager to sell them. George Washington was, of course, the most famous wearer of false teeth from the period. Folklore usually has him wearing wooden teeth, but in reality, they were made from metal, wire, and animal teeth. That is pretty impressive. For the record, they were painful for him to wear and are said to have distorted the shape of his face, which makes him even more of a legend. Powdered wigs were all the rage among the middle and upper classes of the colonial era, made from human and animal hair. Both men and women wore them while keeping their own hair extremely short to prevent lice infestations, which were very common at the time. Shaving the head helped prevent lice, but didn't completely eliminate the problem. The wigs themselves were prone to infestations and had to be regularly cleaned by professionals. Ideally, wigs would receive this care weekly, but the process was expensive, so not everyone maintained their wigs as often. Wig care included boiling the wig to kill lice and dousing it in fragrances like sassafras, bergamot, and bay leaves, believed to have bug-repellent properties. Conversely, the pomade used to style the wigs attracted insects, making wig maintenance quite challenging. In the 1990s, an excavation at the original fort built at Jamestown uncovered a silver ear picker dating back to the 17th century. The instrument had a small scooping tool at one end and a pointed pick at the other. Such picks were used as toothpicks, to clean out fingernails, and for various other hygienic tasks. The scooper side of the ear picker was likely used to remove earwax, which was considered valuable due to its ability to keep thread from unraveling when beeswax was unavailable. Rich Americans have always liked fancy stuff from Europe, even in colonial times. Wealthier colonists often imported expensive fragrant soaps from across the Atlantic. However, most people couldn't afford such luxuries and had to make their own soap or buy it locally. One type of soap available was lye soap, made using a time-consuming and foul-smelling process involving mixing lye, ash, and animal fat. Lye soap was extremely harsh and usually used only for cleaning dishes, clothes, and household items that needed scrubbing. Doing laundry in colonial times was already challenging. It involved hauling water, heating it with fire, wringing the clothes out by hand, and hanging them up to dry. Using the harsh lye soap didn't make it any easier. In practice, this meant only the dirtiest items, like underwear or diapers, would be washed regularly. The women of colonial America didn't shave any part of their bodies. Moral standards of the time dictated that women couldn't show any significant amount of skin, so there was no real point. Even hair on a woman's face was unlikely to be shaved, since shaving was dangerous, and it was believed that bloodbaths could only be prevented by experienced hands. However, women likely plucked hairs and used depilatory or hair removal creams. Recipes for such creams have been found in medical handbooks from the time. One recipe from the 1540s, titled "The Birth of Mankind," called for a mixture that included limestone and arsenic, among other ingredients. It wouldn't be until the 1940s that shaving would become common for American women. America's founding fathers may have known a lot about democracy, but they didn't know much about how to talk to the ladies. Cleanliness in women was a major topic of concern, and doctors of the time advised women to bathe as a way to cure illnesses that affected female reproductive organs. The prevailing wisdom held that women could become offensive to the nose to keep overly amorous men at bay. Dr. Thomas Ewell of Virginia summarized this theory, suggesting that women use smell as a means of defense to ensure protection by rendering themselves as disgusting as possible. I'm going to guess he didn't have a whole lot of female clients. George Washington was well aware of the risks disease posed to the Continental Army, and he was determined to do everything he could to avoid them. During the Revolution, Washington made it clear to his officers that cleanliness was essential to health and service, and he ordered them to watch out for contagions getting into camp. His specific concern at the time was smallpox, but the unsanitary conditions of most military camps meant it was far from the only threat. To help control the risk, Washington's men were supposed to clean their hands and faces once a day and their shirts once a week. However, only a few of the soldiers complied with the order. Maintaining cleanliness in the camps required laborers, known as followers. These followers, who could be men, women, or even children, traveled with the troops, cooked their meals, and cleaned up after them. One witness recorded that the troops were not used to doing such tasks and would sooner let their clothes rot on their backs than wash them themselves. These followers, who took care of the troops throughout the conflict, are some of the unsung heroes of the American Revolution. Hey everyone, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. If you want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel and stay updated on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.